My mother was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really.
The documents were there, then they were gone. And Princess Anne, the one royal who has never once backed down from a fight, decided she was going to find out exactly what happened to them. The morning Anne discovered something was wrong. There are certain qualities that define Princess Anne in the minds of everyone who has ever worked alongside her inside the British royal family. Precision, directness, an absolute intolerance for inefficiency, evasion, or the kind of institutional vagueness that other members of the family have historically deployed as both shield and weapon. She is, by every account of people who know her well, the member of the royal family least likely to let something go, simply because letting it go would be easier than pursuing it. She is the one who asks the question that nobody else in the room wants to ask, the one who reads the document that everyone else assumed would stay unread, the one who, when she reaches for something that should be there and finds that it is not, does not assume a filing error and move on with her day. That quality is precisely why the events of a quiet Tuesday morning in February of 2026 matter as much as they do, and precisely why what began as a routine personal archive review became, within 72 hours, the most explosive legal confrontation the modern royal family has ever produced. Anne had requested access to a specific section of the royal archives 3 days in advance, through the formal written process that even senior members of the royal family are required to follow when accessing restricted historical holdings. The request was routine in its language and unremarkable in its presentation. She was conducting a personal review of documents connected to a specific category of royal estate communications, files she had legitimate and documented reason to access as part of her ongoing responsibilities within the family's institutional management structure. The access was approved without question. It had been approved on multiple previous occasions for the same category of materials. She arrived at the archive room on the morning of February 10th, 2026, accompanied by a single personal aide. The archive room itself is a space that those who have worked within it describe with a consistency that speaks to its particular atmosphere, quiet in the way that only rooms full of old paper can be quiet, cool, climate-controlled, deliberately insulated from the noise and movement of the wider palace. A room that feels, to those who spend time in it, like a place where the past is not stored so much as preserved, held in suspension, waiting. Anne settled at the designated review table. The archive attendant on duty that morning retrieved the catalog reference she had submitted with her access request and went to collect the relevant files. What happened next took less than 4 minutes. The attendant returned to the review table without the files. The catalog reference was accurate. The registration was current. The files had been formally verified as present within the archive system during a comprehensive holdings audit conducted in September of 2025. But the physical location where those files should have been was empty. Not reorganized, not temporarily relocated to another section. Empty in the specific and unambiguous way that tells an experienced archive attendant immediately that something is wrong. Anne looked at the attendant looked at Anne, and in that brief exchange, in the particular quality of the silence that followed, the morning changed its character entirely. She did not raise her voice. She did not, according to the aide present, display any of the visible agitation that the situation might have justified. What she did was considerably more purposeful than agitation. She asked the attendant 3 specific questions. When were these files last formally accessed? Who submitted the access request? And was that access documented in the archive's movement log? The answers to those 3 questions, delivered by an attendant who understood immediately the gravity of what they were communicating, told Anne everything she needed to know to understand that what she was dealing with was not a filing error, not an administrative oversight, and not the kind of innocent institutional mismanagement that a quiet word to a senior courtier could resolve before lunch. The files had been accessed 6 weeks earlier. The access request had been submitted by a senior palace official whose name Anne recognized immediately. and the movement log, which should have recorded what happened to the files after that access, contained a notation that sources describe as the detail that transformed Anne's expression from focused inquiry to something considerably colder. The movement log entry had been manually altered, not erased, not left blank, altered in a way that someone with knowledge of archive procedure would recognize as deliberate, and that someone without that knowledge might never notice at all. Anne left the archive room 20 minutes after she arrived. She went directly to her private office, closed the door, and made 2 telephone calls. The first was to her personal solicitor. The second was to a senior member of the palace's internal security team. She did not call William. She did not call Charles. She did not route her response through any of the usual channels of royal family communication that would have given anyone else the opportunity to become involved before she had established exactly what she was dealing with. That decision, to move immediately, independently, and with the full force of her own authority before anyone else in the family knew what was happening, is the decision that made everything that followed inevitable. And it is the decision that a senior palace official, sitting somewhere inside that building, completely unaware of what Anne had just discovered, was about to wish with everything they had that she had not made. Stay with us, because what those missing documents actually contained is the detail that explains why someone was desperate enough to make them disappear in the first place. What the missing documents actually contained. There is a reason the Royal Archives exist in the form that they do. Not simply as a storage facility for historical curiosity, not as a repository of ceremonial records and commemorative correspondence that future historians might one day find useful. The Royal Archives serve a function that is simultaneously historical, legal, and deeply institutional. They are the place where the monarchy's most consequential private decisions are preserved in their original form, in the handwriting of the people who made them, with the signatures and seals that give those decisions their binding authority. They are, in the most literal possible sense, the place where the monarchy keeps its most important truths, which is precisely why the disappearance of a specific collection of files from within that system was not, as some palace officials initially attempted to frame it in the chaotic hours following Anne's discovery, a matter of administrative inconvenience. It was a direct strike at the legal and institutional foundations of decisions that had been made, documented, and preserved specifically because they were too important to exist only in memory or in the unreliable currency of verbal understanding. So, what exactly was inside those files? What was so significant, so legally consequential, and so potentially transformative in its implications that someone had taken the extraordinary risk of accessing them without authorization and altering the movement log to obscure what had happened afterward? The answer begins with Queen Elizabeth II. As her health declined through 2021 and into 2022, the Queen had engaged in a process of private documentation that went considerably beyond the formal legal instruments, the wills, the covenant trusts, the sealed directives that her constitutional advisors were preparing through official channels. In parallel with that formal process, Elizabeth had been writing. Personally, privately, and with a specificity that reflected her intimate knowledge of every dimension of the institution she had spent 70 years leading. These private writings took several forms. Some were personal letters addressed to specific family members, to be opened at specific future moments. Some were what palace archivists describe as reflective directives, detailed personal statements of the Queen's wishes, observations, and instructions regarding matters she considered too sensitive or too complex to be captured adequately within the language of formal legal documentation. And some were something else entirely. Something that sources familiar with the archive holdings describe in terms that make immediately clear why their disappearance constituted a crisis rather than an inconvenience. Among the missing files was a collection of documents that Elizabeth had personally designated as Succession Advisory Correspondence, private communications written in her own hand across a period stretching from 2019 to 2022, addressed to senior members of the royal household and to specific constitutional advisors, in which she had set out her personal assessment of the institutional challenges the monarchy would face in the years following her death. Her observations about specific family members and their readiness for the responsibilities they would inherit. her instructions regarding the management of certain royal assets whose future had not been fully resolved through formal legal channels, and her personal directives regarding a small number of institutional relationships and arrangements that she considered essential to the stability of the succession and that she had structured in ways that her formal legal documents did not fully explain. Now pause here and consider what that means in practical terms, because this is the detail that changes everything about the nature of Anne's response and the speed with which she moved to pursue legal action rather than quietly escalating through palace channels. The Queen's succession advisory correspondence was not simply historically significant. It was legally consequential in ways that directly affected the current distribution of royal assets, the authority underpinning certain institutional decisions that had already been made, and the documentary foundation of arrangements that specific members of the royal family were relying on to support their current positions and future claims. In plain language, those documents contained instructions and directives from the last monarch that had direct bearing on who controlled what, who was entitled to what, and on what legal and personal authority certain decisions affecting the monarchy's future had been made. Their disappearance did not simply create a historical gap. It created a legal vulnerability, a space where decisions that had been made on the basis of the Queen's documented wishes could now be challenged, questioned, or reframed by anyone with an interest in doing so, precisely because the documentary evidence underpinning those decisions had been removed from the archive where it was supposed to be permanently protected. And here is the question that Anne's legal team began constructing their entire case around the moment she briefed them on what the archive attendant had told her. If those documents were simply lost, misplaced, or accidentally removed through some innocent administrative failure, why had the movement log been altered? Because documents do not alter movement logs. People alter movement logs. People who know what the movement log records and understand that what it records in this particular instance is something they cannot allow to remain visible. People who had accessed those files with a specific purpose and needed the evidence of that access to disappear along with the files themselves. That is the question that the senior palace official at the center of this story was going to have to answer. In court, under oath, in front of the full legal apparatus of the British judicial system, with Princess Anne sitting across the room, watching every word. Stay with us because who that official is, what their connection to those documents reveals about the forces operating inside the palace, and what they were planning to do with what they found inside those files is the chapter that makes this entire story make sense. The senior official at the center of the storm. There is a particular kind of person that the British royal household has always depended upon and always, in its more vulnerable moments, been endangered by. Not the visible figures. It's not the family members whose faces appear on commemorative china and whose movements are tracked by a global press corps. The invisible ones. The senior officials who operate in the spaces between the ceremonial and the institutional, who know where everybody is buried because they helped bury several of them, who have accumulated over decades of quiet, loyal, apparently selfless service, a level of access, knowledge, and institutional leverage that no title, no bloodline, and no constitutional position can fully replicate. They are the people the monarchy cannot function without. And they are, when something goes wrong, the people the monarchy is most completely exposed by. The senior palace official at the center of Anne's legal action is one of those people. His name, withheld from public reporting at the time of the initial legal filing on the advice of counsel, had been known inside the palace for over 2 decades as a byword for discretion, competence, and the kind of institutional loyalty that senior royals rely on without ever fully examining. He had served across 3 distinct phases of the modern monarchy. He had been trusted by Queen Elizabeth II with access to some of the most sensitive operational dimensions of the royal archives. He had survived the transition from Elizabeth's reign to Charles's, with his position and his reputation entirely intact. And he had, in the years since Charles's coronation, quietly accumulated a level of access to the palace's private institutional architecture that very few people inside the building fully understood or had ever thought to question. That access is where the story begins. And it is where Anne's legal team began when they started constructing the paper trail that would eventually become the foundation of formal court proceedings. the archive movement log, even in its altered form, contained enough residual information for a forensic document examiner to establish with confidence the date and approximate time of the official's last access to the missing files. It was a Thursday evening in late December of 2025, after the archive's regular operating hours, accessed under an authorization code that was technically valid but had not been used for that specific archive section in over 14 months. The combination of those details, the after-hours timing, the dormant authorization code, and the subsequent alteration of the log entry painted a picture that Anne's legal team described in their formal filing in terms that left no room for innocent interpretation. But the access itself, troubling as its circumstances were, was only the first layer of what the investigation began to uncover. Because when Anne's solicitors began examining the official's communications over the preceding 6 months, what they found suggested that the December archive visit was not an isolated act of opportunism. It was the culmination of a process that had been underway for considerably longer. Beginning in the summer of 2025, the official had engaged in a pattern of communications with 2 individuals outside the palace, whose identities, when they emerged through the legal discovery process, produced the kind of silence in Anne's legal team that only genuinely unexpected information can create. The first was a private heritage law specialist based in Edinburgh, whose practice focuses specifically on the legal interpretation of royal personal directives and private sovereign instruments. The kind of lawyer you retain when you are trying to understand whether a specific royal document can be legally challenged, reinterpreted, or argued around. The second was considerably more significant and considerably more troubling. The second individual was a financial advisor with documented connections to commercial interests that had, over the preceding 18 months, been quietly positioning themselves around several royal-adjacent asset opportunities. Commercial interests that sources familiar with the situation describe, without elaborating further at this stage, as having a very specific and very direct stake in the content of the documents that subsequently went missing. Now, hold that detail carefully, because it connects to something that Anne's legal team identified as the most important single thread in their entire case. The missing documents did not simply contain general succession advisory correspondence. Among the specific files that had been removed was a collection of the Queen's private directives relating to the future management and disposition of certain royal estate assets whose legal status had been a matter of quiet internal dispute since the months following Elizabeth's death. Assets whose value, both financially and institutionally, made them the subject of considerable interest to people operating both inside and outside the palace's formal structure. The heritage law specialist that the official had been communicating with had, according to documents recovered by Anne's legal team, provided a written legal assessment in October of 2025. That assessment examined the specific question of whether private sovereign directives of the kind contained in the missing files could, under certain interpretive frameworks, be challenged or superseded by subsequent institutional arrangements. In plain language, the official had been consulting a specialist lawyer about whether the Queen's personal instructions could be legally argued away. 2 months later, those instructions disappeared from the archive. Ask yourself what conclusion that sequence of events invites. Because Anne's legal team asked themselves the same question and arrived at an answer they placed directly and without equivocation into their formal court filing. The disappearance of the documents was not accidental, was not administrative, and was not the act of a person operating alone on their own initiative. It was, the filing argued, the final step in a deliberate and coordinated effort to remove from the institutional record specific documented instructions from Queen Elizabeth II, whose continued existence in the royal archives represented a direct obstacle to interests that certain individuals, inside and outside the palace, were actively pursuing. That allegation, placed formally into the public legal record by a princess of the British royal family against a senior official who had served the crown for over 2 decades, sent a tremor through the palace that sources describe as unlike anything in recent memory, because it did not simply implicate one official. It implied a network. It implied planning. It implied that the disappearance of those documents was connected to something larger. Something still unfolding, and something that the people behind it had believed they could execute without anyone noticing. They had not counted on Anne, They had not counted on her precision, her refusal to assume innocent explanations, and her absolute willingness to drag the full weight of British legal proceedings into the most private spaces of the royal household, if that was what finding the truth required. And now, with a formal filing made and the court date set, they were about to discover exactly what it meant to have underestimated the one member of the royal family who has never once in her life been accused of letting something go. Stay with us, because what happened when Anne took this to court sent shockwaves through the palace that are still being felt today. Anne takes it to court. There is something that people who have never witnessed Princess Anne in a professional context consistently underestimate about her. They see the public figure, the hard-working royal, the accomplished equestrian, the woman who has carried out more official engagements than almost any other member of the family across 5 decades of royal service. They see the composed, slightly intimidating exterior, and they read it as the whole story. What they miss, what those who have worked with her closely never miss, is the quality beneath that exterior. The quality that makes her, in the assessment of every senior legal and institutional figure who has ever sat across a table from her in a professional context, one of the most formidable individuals in the entire British establishment. She is not simply determined. She is precise, prepared, and completely without the instinct towards self-protection that causes most powerful people to hesitate before they act. She did not hesitate. On February 14th, 2026, exactly 4 days after her discovery in the archive room, Anne's legal team filed formal proceedings in the High Court of England and Wales against the senior palace official whose access to the missing files had been documented by the altered movement log. The filing was submitted under a legal framework that combined civil claims for the recovery of specific documents with formal allegations of misconduct in a position of institutional trust. It was, in the assessment of constitutional legal experts who reviewed it when its existence became public, one of the most precisely constructed legal documents they had encountered in the context of royal family proceedings. Every allegation was supported by specific documented evidence. Every claim was anchored in a legal framework that had been selected with obvious care for its applicability to the specific circumstances. Nothing was included that could not be substantiated. Nothing that could be substantiated was omitted. The filing named the official directly. It detailed the archive access. It documented the movement log alteration. It outlined the communications with the Edinburgh Heritage Law Specialist. It referenced the financial advisor connections and their relationship to the commercial interests with a stake in the missing documents. And it made explicit, in language that left absolutely no room for misinterpretation, the allegation that the disappearance of Queen Elizabeth's private succession directives had been a deliberate, coordinated act designed to remove from the institutional record documents whose continued existence obstructed specific interests that the official had been actively serving. When the filing became public, the palace's response was immediate and entirely predictable. A spokesman issued a carefully worded statement, acknowledging that a legal matter was before the courts and confirming that it would be inappropriate to comment further while proceedings were ongoing. That statement, in its studied neutrality, communicated something considerably more significant than its bland language suggested. Because what the palace did not say was equally important as what it did not distance itself from Anne's action. It did not express concern about the decision to pursue external legal proceedings over an internal matter. It did not deploy any of the usual mechanisms through which the royal family signals its discomfort with a family member's independent actions. It simply acknowledged the proceedings and stepped back. That silence, sources inside the palace confirm, was itself a decision. A deliberate institutional choice to allow Anne's legal action to proceed without interference, without the kind of quiet pressure that the palace has historically applied to family members whose independent actions threaten to expose uncomfortable institutional realities. Charles had been informed of the filing before it was submitted. He had said nothing to stop it. William, who had been briefed by Anne personally in the 48 hours before the filing, had expressed his full support. For the first time in what sources describe as living memory, the British royal family was allowing one of its own to drag a senior palace official into open court without closing ranks around the institution to prevent it. Ask yourself why. Because the answer to that question is the thread that connects Anne's legal action to everything else that has been unfolding inside the palace since the beginning of 2026. The blocked funds, the stripped titles, the audit findings. Each of those episodes represented William and Charles drawing a clear and unambiguous line between the era of opacity, informal arrangement, and unaccountable institutional access that had allowed the problems to develop, and a new era defined by documentation, accountability, and the willingness to pursue consequences through formal channels, regardless of how uncomfortable those consequences might be for the people involved. Anne's court filing was the same line, drawn in legal ink in a public forum by the member of the royal family whose personal credibility and institutional reputation made the act of drawing it carry a weight that nobody inside or outside the palace could dismiss or minimize. She was not a future king making strategic moves towards succession. She was not a queen consort defending her position. She was the Princess Royal, the hardest working, least glamorous, most professionally respected member of the entire family, saying plainly and publicly that something had been done inside this institution that could not be absorbed quietly, and that the person responsible was going to answer for it in court. The official's legal team filed an initial response 2 weeks later. It was, sources familiar with its contents say, considerably less precisely constructed than Anne's filing. It offered procedural challenges rather than substantive rebuttals. It questioned the jurisdiction of certain claims rather than addressing their factual bases. It was, in the assessment of constitutional legal observers, the response of a legal team that had been handed an extremely difficult brief and was doing its best with very little to work with. Because the evidence Anne had assembled was not the kind that procedural challenges can make disappear. It was documented, it was sequential, and it was, in the most critical respects, already in the hands of the court. Stay with us, because what happened when the palace fractures began to show, and William stepped into the middle of this story, is where everything changes. The palace fractures. The court filing did something that no amount of internal palace politics, private confrontations, or quietly managed institutional pressure had managed to do in the months preceding it. It forced the fractures inside Buckingham Palace into the open. Not dramatically, not in the form of public statements or rival press briefings, or the kind of visible family warfare that tabloids dream about, but in the way that matters most inside an institution built on carefully maintained appearances. It made the divisions impossible to deny to the people living inside them. Within 72 hours of the filing becoming public, 3 senior courtiers with direct connections to the official named in the proceedings had requested meetings with palace legal advisors, not to offer support to Anne's action, to establish quietly and with considerable urgency the precise boundaries of their own potential exposure. That detail, when it reached William through his own channels, told him everything he needed to know about how deeply the network around the missing documents extended into the palace's operational structure. He moved on a Wednesday morning in late February, not through the courts, not through public statement, but through the internal mechanism he had demonstrated repeatedly was his preferred instrument of institutional correction. He convened a closed emergency session with the keeper of the privy purse, the palace's head of security, and 2 senior members of the Royal Archives Oversight Committee. The session lasted 3 hours. What was decided inside that room has not been formally disclosed, but within 48 hours of it concluding, 2 additional senior officials had been placed on administrative leave pending a review of their archive access histories. The network was being dismantled. Quietly, systematically, and with the forensic precision that has become the defining characteristic of William's institutional interventions. And then came the detail that changed everything. A palace security review, commissioned as part of William's emergency session, recovered something that Anne's original investigation had not located: a digital record of the document transfer, incomplete, partially corrupted, but containing enough recoverable data to establish with legal certainty where the missing files had been taken after their removal from the archive, and more critically, who had received them. The name that emerged from that recovered record landed inside the palace like a depth charge, because it was not the name of someone outside the institution, it was the name of someone still inside it. Stay with us, because the final chapter is where the full truth surfaces and nothing will look the same afterward. What the documents revealed. The recovered digital record pointed to a private server registered to a legal entity that palace security analysts identified within 24 hours of beginning their trace. A holding company incorporated in Jersey in the autumn of 2025, a company with no public profile, no trading history, and no visible connection to the British royal family or any of its associated institutional structures. A company that existed, in the assessment of the analysts who found it, for a single purpose: to receive, store, and ultimately deploy the contents of Queen Elizabeth's missing succession directives in service of a legal challenge that had been in preparation for months before Anne ever walked into that archive room. The documents themselves were recovered on March 3rd, 2026, intact, unaltered, and accompanied by a cache of preparatory legal materials that told the full story of what they had been taken to support. Queen Elizabeth's private succession directives, read in their complete and original form for the first time since their removal, contained something that sources describe as both entirely consistent with everything the Queen had been quietly building in her final years and utterly devastating to the interests of the people who had tried to make them disappear. The directives confirmed, in the Queen's own handwriting and with the full authority of her personal sovereign instruction, that specific royal assets whose legal status had been disputed in the months following her death had been intentionally and exclusively designated for William, not shared, not subject to collaborative management or heritage partnership arrangements, exclusively and irrevocably his. The commercial interests connected to the holding company, the same interests that the official had been communicating with, through the Edinburgh Heritage Law Specialist, had been preparing a legal challenge arguing that the absence of documented royal directives left those asset designations open to reinterpretation. Without the documents, the challenge had a foundation. With them returned to the royal archives, it had nothing. Elizabeth had seen it coming. She had written her directives with a precision that suggested she understood exactly what would be attempted after she was gone, and had constructed her instructions to leave no exploitable gap. Anne had found the gap that others had tried to create and closed it with the full force of British legal proceedings. William had dismantled the network that had tried to exploit it. And the documents, Queen Elizabeth's final unanswerable words, were back where they belonged. Locked, sealed, and protected. Exactly as she had always intended,